The game they are playing at that table is Dungeons & Dragons. You play it by making a character on one of these sheets and determine the outcomes of your actions using these polyhedral dice. You fight monsters, cast magic, but most importantly, have fun with some friends. Millions of people play Dungeons & Dragons every day. It even has its own spot in the National Toy Hall of Fame. But how did this all start, and why is it so popular? Let's jump back to the beginning. Fostered by their love of war games they had played, Dungeons & Dragons was made by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson in the year of 1974. It was a fun game and it showed. It was loved by kids and adults alike. It was all going smoothly for Gygax and Arneson, but that's when disaster struck. D&D took a sinister turn and it got worse when the son of one Pat Poling killed himself. Poling said it was because of Dungeons & Dragons. He cited the magic and the demons in the game as cause for his suicide. At this time in history, rock music, movies, and even books were being lambasted by traditional Christians for poisoning the youth of America and turning them to Satanism. The death of Poling's son laid down fuel for the fire that was the Satanic Panic, and so it spread to D&D. Gygax and Arneson were soon faced with a battle. This is the story of the Dungeons & Dragons moral panic.
Dungeons & Dragons is a real serious problem.
The media soon turned on D&D. One such article was written by the Daily Trojan and is quoted as such: "The battles which rage over moral implications of Dungeons & Dragons are as heated as the violent conflicts which take place in the game itself. Thousands of parents confiscated their children's books and entire communities of fearful Christians protested the game. It all escalated until the Satanic Panic hit the media forefront when a young man by the name of James Dallas Egbert disappeared on August 15, 1979. The Egbert family hired the private investigator William Deere to help find James. William inspected James Egbert's room at Michigan State University. What could have been found there might have changed the story, but it was all ignored when Deere found manuals to Dungeons & Dragons. After this, the media went into a feeding frenzy. Fanatical ideas of Egbert being taken by the devil or running away because of the game became commonplace. The investigation continued until William Deere found a corkboard riddled with pins in James's room. Deere matched the corkboard up with a map of the sewers under the university that the students attending Michigan State said was the setting for where James and his friends played D&D. Deere and the team investigated the sewers, and when nothing was found, the media eventually slowed down. Months later, James Egbert reappeared. The information of this occurrence stays private to his family even to today. The sad end to this story is that on August 16, 1980, James Dallas Egbert III killed himself. James was a child prodigy. He attended Michigan State at only 16 years old. What is truly tragic is that James's mental health was completely ignored by his friends, family, and the media due to his hobby of playing D&D. Maybe if Deere just didn't find those books, real precautions may have been made to look into James's mental state, the real reason he disappeared. Tens and hundreds of more cases of murders and other mysteries were exaggerated by the media and evangelists. In one case, a televangelist had a segment covering one of these murders, where he lied about Dungeons & Dragons paraphernalia being on the victim's body. The reach that the Satanic Panic had was extraordinary. The sewers from the James Egbert case would be later referenced in Tom Hanks's second ever film debut, Mazes and Monsters.
JJ, what am I doing here?
Needless to say, it wasn't a smash hit. The media may have slowed down from the Egbert case, but the Satanic Panic train had no stops in sight. Gary and Arneson were put on the defensive and hired a psychologist to shield against some of the bad press surrounding their game.
There is good and evil in life, and the way Dungeons & Dragons is set up is that good triumphs over evil.
TSR, the company run by Gary Gygax, excluded the words demon or devil from the next edition of Dungeons & Dragons in hopes of avoiding any comparison to Satanism. TSR's efforts seemed in vain as more radical ideas were thrown around.
But they'd take the pieces of the game, they would throw them in the incinerator or the fireplace, and screams would come out because there seemed to be some kind of spiritual forces inhabiting those pieces.
But the forbidden fruit is often the sweetest. The irony of it all is that within 90 days of James Dallas Egbert's disappearance, D&D sold thousands of more copies. D&D rose in popularity to the dismay of Christian parents across the nation. As the media does, it moved on to new topics, and D&D continued to thrive. That's not to say the road to today wasn't bumpy. TSR sold D&D to Wizards of the Coast in 1997 due to a series of poor management that led to a large debt being owed to its printing company. A goal I hope to achieve from seeing other National History Day projects is to witness mistakes from the past, so I do not repeat them in the future. So what should we learn from this moral panic? Parents will be parents and will be worried about what their children are doing. Yesterday, it was Dungeons & Dragons, today, it's what we do on our phones, and tomorrow, we'll worry about something brand new. But the worst thing possible is to blame everything on the taboo of the hour, while ignoring extremely serious problems that could be lying under the surface. Currently, Dungeons & Dragons is thought of in opposition to what it used to be. Now, parents would view D&D as a healthy game to play instead of computer games that many people play today. And I'm sure computer games will soon lose the stigma that is around it as well. The case of James Dallas Egbert will live on in infamy as a tale of neglectfulness of mental health, and the Satanic Panic will be remembered as a bad choice that alienated many kids from other groups. I'm proud to say that today the Dungeons & Dragons community is juxtaposed to both those points in history, and now the most prominent members in the D&D community are some of the most inclusive and progressive about mental health people I know of. Dungeons & Dragons has become a breeding ground for some of the most talented artists, animators, and story writers. I realize today that there are still some people that think playing Dungeons & Dragons is nerdy and weird. Well, I think those people are spot on, but I don't like D&D for the numbers or the stats. And to share that sentiment, I called some friends to ask them why they think D&D is important. What is your favorite thing about D&D?
I believe my favorite thing about D&D is the fact that it's an outlet for my fantasy kind of mind. It allows me to create a character and do their voice and act them out, and get to do all of that while playing them through an adventure.
How often do you play D&D?
So I only play D&D every week with Yukatsu, and then I watch Critical Role. But yeah, I'm gonna be starting a Pathfinder campaign with some friends soon, but for now, it's just a weekly thing.
Why do you think Critical Role is so appealing to you?
I watch so much YouTube, dude. And it's kind of the same thing. It's watching other people do something that I would love to do. And it's done professionally, so it looks really nice. And it's D&D, which is interesting to me. And so it's just cool.
Dungeons and Dragons is very meaningful. I mean, it allows me to put myself into a less boring reality. Instead of just wake up every day, go to school, I get to do something, I get to have fun.
D&D is obviously an important part of the lives to those who play it, whether it provides an escapist fantasy or getting to put out a bunch of stored up creative energy when you otherwise couldn't. I love D&D because I get to hang out with friends, be in a world where I'm capable of great feats, write my own fantasy world. But most importantly, I get to have a shared experience with millions of people over the world that I've never met before. D&D is important because it connects the world. D&D is meaningful because you can become a mighty wizard. D&D is triumphant because it all came from one guy making a game in his basement, the most popular role-playing game of all time.